Hello and welcome to ESI Focus, where we dive into a specific sector of the esports industry with special guests. My name is Kerry Wananen, head of multimedia content at Esports Insider. You cannot really tell, but I am hosting today from a very summery Seattle. This is the third episode of the mini-series focused on the legal intricacies in esports, presented by law firm Sheppard Mullin. Sheppard Mullin represents athletes, influencers, and content creators, media and advertising agencies, tournament operators, venues, advertisers in and outside of esports. For more information, please visit sheppardmullin.com. In this very special episode, as you can see, I'm joined by three wonderful guests where we will be discussing the intricacies of esports gambling. We have Craig Levine, co-CEO of ESL Gaming, Marc Brody, Vice President of Business Development at Bally's Interactive, and Daniel Schnapp, partner at Sheppard Mullin's Entertainment, Technology, and Advertising Practice Group. How are you fine gentlemen today?
Fine, thanks.
Doing great.
Doing well.
Great. Let's start off with some introductions. Craig, ESL Gaming's reputation likely precedes itself, but for those that maybe don't know the history of ESL Gaming and your involvement in that, could you please tell us a little bit about the story of the growth there?
Yeah, so at ESL we're kind of founded by players ourselves, so we all grew up kind of playing competitive games in the late 90s, the early 2000s, Quake, and eventually Counter-Strike, and we wanted to really kind of just have fun with friends. So we, became players that started teams. We wanted to see how our teams compared against others and started creating leagues. The highest form of competition would always be in person. So we started doing these events. And 20 years later, we've been trading a paperclip for a legal pad for a Ferrari here that we feel like we're driving. And today, ESL, we're the world's largest independent esports company. So we work with a variety of different titles on all different platforms. Operating both big competitions like Intel Extreme Masters and ESL One, as well as gaming and lifestyle festivals under DreamHack, which was founded as well in sort of 1994. So similar to the company's history, I've been patient zero through that journey myself, having played, having competed, and grown into, I guess, now the current role that I'm in as co-CEO of ESL.
Amazing. Mark, I was doing a lot of research about Bally's Interactive's history, and the company's done a lot throughout the years. Could you talk a little bit about that and your journey in your role as Vice President of Business Development?
Sure. So Bally Interactive, which is the division that I am Vice President of Business Development for, was created recently. My company, BetWorks, which I was a co-founder of, was acquired by Bally Corporation late last year. And recently, through a series of acquisitions, we've acquired a daily fantasy product in the name of Monkey Knife Fight. We are operators of one of the larger free-to-play platforms out there with our purchase of Sport Caller. And this all kind of falls under the umbrella of Bally Interactive, of which our consumer-facing brand is Bally Bet, which recently was deployed in Iowa and Colorado. When you take the Ballyverse as it stands today, we span within our group not only online gaming, but we also have the third largest land-based casino footprint in the country to date. And also recently, via our relationship with Sinclair, we renamed all of the regional sports networks Bally Sports. So via that relationship, we have roughly half the NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball, their local broadcast on our RSNs. So we have a very wide distribution footprint, and we have a very wide portfolio of gaming companies that create the top of the funnel for bringing people into the Ballyverse and ultimately into the betting vertical of Bally Bet, which is primarily our focus on the BD side.
Awesome. And Dan, I've had a few of your colleagues on the series already, Brian Anderson and Sid Foreman. Could you tell us a little bit about the technology transactions and a little bit more about esports and games industry team at Sheppard Mullin?
Sure. We formed the industry team approximately 3 years ago, knowing that there's going to be significant interest in a multidisciplinary approach to this sector, particularly in esports and games. Our firm has a long history in entertainment and media and technology transactions and the conversion of all three. This team was specifically focused on this sector, having all these unique aspects because we deal with a variety of transactions and litigation flowing from this sector. So bringing a multidisciplinary approach with folks from our labor and employment teams to deal with labor and employment issues, immigration, facilities management, brand management, entertainment, technology, advertising, and sponsorships. So we've got experts in all of those sectors, Sid and Brian being two of those. I co-chair the group with Sid Foreman. My practice specifically has historically been surrounding the exploitation of technology and innovation in a variety of industry sectors, but particularly in entertainment, media, and sports. And I've had a long history doing that as well as gaming, specifically interactive gaming on the entertainment side. So that this team is near and dear to my heart, and we're in it day in and day out.
Awesome. Well, I am super excited for our conversation today. We have some heavy hitters in the industry with us. And I don't know if this is, if the audience is aware of this or if you guys are aware of this, but Esports Insider actually started focusing on the convergence of esports and betting. That's how the company was started in late 2017. That was before my time, so maybe it was 2016. But we have continued our coverage of bookmakers' activity in the esports space, and there has been quite a lot of it recently. It seems more and more that orgs and leagues have bookmaking partners, and that there's a lot of collaborative content around the cooperation there. What I would love to hear from you gentlemen, is while it may seem that there's maybe a low barrier to entry because there has been so much activity, what is maybe some things that are potentially underreported or not necessarily that well known of challenges in not only entering the space as a bookmaker, but also operating within esports as a bookmaker? Let's start with you, Mark.
Sure. That's a great question. I look at everything, via a, U.S. perspective and a U.S. Regulatory line of vision. While there's a lot of esports, gambling that takes place worldwide, we haven't had that critical mass yet in the United States. So on the regulatory front, the biggest story to date happened a couple of weeks ago, where the state of New Jersey, the Division of Gaming Enforcement, permanently passed regulations for esports. Now, as you guys actually, did a really, great job reporting on, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in a way, where there's a cap on the amount of money that you can bet per event of $100 US dollars, and there's a cap on the winnings, so you can't win more than $500 off that $100 wager. Now, that's a little bit restrictive in terms of creating a broader market. There are some people that just $100 isn't interesting to them, or, they don't want to be capped on their winnings. They want to do parlays and things of that nature. And I think we will get there. Okay. And like any other regulated sport or any other regulated environment, there's usually a walk before you run type attitude. I think the Division of Gaming in New Jersey has done a phenomenal job with bringing esports into the regulated environment. This is not their first foray into esports. They've sanctioned previous esports events in the state to be wagered on. They sanctioned an event for live and play esports tournament at Borgata a couple of years ago. So they're a great barometer for the rest of the industry. And I think that, this regulatory update is indicative of what we will see spreading throughout the country over the next 2 to 3 years as regulators get more comfortable with the issues surrounding esports that might not be what I would say considered, a problem within the esports community, but from the outside looking in, I think there's still a level of comfort that needs to be gotten by state legislators and state regulators that, young people under the age of 21 aren't going to be targeted. They're not going to be exposed to gambling, marketing, and these types of issues. And the underlying issues that maybe esports have that might be exaggerated in some of those conversations. And I think that's kind of a great segue over to, Craig, who can kind of give us a little bit more insight into what some of those current underlying issues are that, regulators have, approached, him about over the years and where they are right now in their evolution of, the gamification and the betification of the esports product.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I definitely very much agree. I think the biggest obstacle is time. It's everyone getting comfortable with it, and it's comfortable first off of the tailwinds, let's call it, or headway of traditional sports. Something that's been around for generations and 100 and something plus years at this point. And now how sports betting is being unlocked on different state by state level here in the U.S. And I think with that, then it's natural that esports sort of follows suit through that versus leading through that, sort of the tip of the arrow, if you will. I think the biggest challenges as the industry, the biggest obstacle is the education then also around the integrity of the product and the sport. I think that's something that we've at ESL taken incredibly seriously from the earliest. We started the Esports Integrity Coalition several years ago, actually, before the push had kind of come, recognizing that with any traditional sport, it's that integrity that you have to keep it pure. And when you look around the world and you see, cycling and cricket and other scandals that have, kind of come across, it was important to us that we try to get ahead of this. And for us, it's having that independent sort of authority, if you will, that's investigating claims, that has the cooperation of operators like ourselves behind it for the matches to make sure that they're happening at the highest level with the right purity. So, it's risk assessments, it's analyzing different data, it's player education as well. It's cooperating with law enforcement when there's investigations, because this really is going to be an ongoing effort, as you've seen with other sports, that as the stakes get bigger, you need to add a certain level of sophistication and integrity then behind it. So I think that's really sort of one of the biggest challenges that exists, is how do we make sure with the changing landscape where participation is pretty wide. Also, as Mark alluded to, right, that some of the players are under certain ages, and also that there's maturing economics around the player economy, if you will, meaning, right, it's not, in the NBA where the average contract is, millions of dollars. In esports, the top earners are making, millions of dollars, but your sort of average competitor is not there yet. So the temptation could be higher. So as that matures, as that grows, as there's more stakeholder alignment between teams and players and organizers, and the revenue pot of esports grows, I think over time that will be an opportunity to use that to our advantage to, again, really, make sure that we align interest and preserve it, the integrity. I think the other obstacle that exists is, the unique position of esports being that the IP and games are owned by a publisher, meaning that every esport, and esports is a big word, so it's like sports here, that every esport is going to have a different approach and license agreement of what operators like an ESL or publishers themselves are comfortable with based off their core business. So for us at ESL, we work a lot with Counter-Strike and Dota 2, variety of other titles, but for us, that has been our leading product as we've worked with different legal wagering companies across the world to feature this. But we're big believers in the gamification of it, as Mark spoke to, and people who are competing in esports or even viewing it tend to have a higher drive, if you will, competitiveness to it that becomes natural than just traditional gamers. So we think there's a market fit, and then the demographic of it, I think, is super attractive. So a lot of these moving pieces, but I think those are some of the challenges that we're working to overcome.
Yeah, Kerry, just to jump in on that, I think I echo all those sentiments exactly, but I would challenge the fact that it's a low bar to entry. I think our clients, unlike some of the folks that are on this call that are, leading experts in the industry and have been around for a while, both on the sports betting side and the esports side, the majority of the clients in this market, traditional operators, are not typically equipped to capitalize on these opportunities. The demand is there, right? There's certainly a market recognition that there could be a $1 billion industry here, in a $100 billion market. But the issue is that there's a huge learning curve actually for the typical operator, because there are no direct corollaries necessarily to pre-existing sports betting markets, for example. We find our clients are kind of dumbfounded by the wide variety of IP and games that Craig spoke about. They have their own fans and their own, seasons and leagues and activity. So for a casual fan and a casual bettor that's looking at any particular opportunity to get into betting on esports or an esports contest, that's a daunting hurdle to get over from a marketing perspective for an operator, and just generally. So it's a specialized market. It's got an almost infinite amount of outcomes, and we could talk to Mark more about how a bookmaker might even handle that. But I think there's large investment required, and we're coming out of a pandemic which drove a lot of the demand for gaming generally, and certainly for this, when traditional sports were locked down and shut down because there were no sports for a while. This started to take hold. Esports contests, online contests, were still going on worldwide, but it is a large hurdle to get over. And I think all the issues that we talked about, the demographic is tends to skew into that underage market or minors that can't gamble, and then you've got advertising issues. A lot of the gaming that's going on and the social aspects of these games going on social media platforms like Twitter and others, and Twitch, and even on Twitter, I think there was a study done in the UK recently where there were significant advertising being targeted to minors, and minors then taking memes of particular aspects of gambling, messaging where it doesn't have a specific disclosure that it is, intended for a mature audience, for those of the age of majority. And I think there are, regulators out there, certainly in the United States, that are loath to actually jump into this with 2 feet, even though there is a market for it and there is some demand. So it should be interesting how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think I can build right on top of that, what Dan said. And Dan, that was, very eloquent. And there's a lot to unpack there. I think I'll take it kind of in reverse order. So as far as responsible gaming and RG laws are concerned, I think you hit the nail right on the head. And I think Craig alluded to this, earlier, which is when we talk about esports, anybody born, before, 1990. Okay. There's a little bit of a connotation there of, kids are playing these games, and, there's a lot of exposure to kids and under 18. And the reality is that from a gambling standpoint, we can control all that. Okay. So we have the right systems in place, today to make sure that unless there's, a very close impersonation going on, meaning like, some child of someone logs into their parent's account and is gambling under their name. There's a lot of know your customer protocols put in place by the gambling companies to make sure that, we eliminate the access for underage patrons to gamble on any sports, whether it's esports or any traditional sports. So I think that Danny's right, that from an education standpoint, esports should almost lead with responsible gaming protocols to kind of, create that messaging that, hey, we understand this is a concern and we're going to address it straight away. Okay. So I think that's one thing. Then when we talk about, and Danny made a great point. It's funny because Danny and I were actually talking yesterday, and it was in the morning, and I'm like, I'm super busy. And he's like, why are you so busy on a Sunday, at, 9 o'clock in the morning? And I'm like, the final of Wimbledon's going on. And he's like, and I'm like, well, listen, I'm like, tennis happens to be one of our, most popular in-play betting sports because you can bet frequently during the match on every serve, on every game, and we are able to create many markets within a tennis match. And that really is a great apples to apples comparison with what we're looking at with esports. And it's really kind of, live in-play markets on steroids when we talk about esports because of the amount of concurrent actions that are taking place in any one time. And that can be during a 100-person, Fortnite last man standing tournament where you could have, a plethora of markets related to, what any one individual is doing. Okay. Or in the team setting, you can have, 4 or 5 teams, playing in a different game, like whether it's CSGO or Dota or any of these other team games, where, again, you have multiple concurrent actions taking place that we can make markets around. Now, in order for us to hit critical mass in that area, it's going to require real-time data and major cooperation with the publishers and with the broadcasters. And this is kind of where, again, it's a wonderful panel here today where I'll throw it back to Craig and let him kind of explain kind of how that infrastructure is currently being built out so that we can get that data from the publishers and be able to feed that into our trading algorithms and start creating those markets. Craig, you want to kind of build on that?
Yeah. The digital nature Mark spoke about, right? It creates all those opportunities, but also the instantaneous accuracy. And I think that I think that also changes the cost model of traditional sports and, human error and things like that. So I think that's super appealing as you start to talk about all those scenarios that Mark described. And for us, it starts with getting sort of server access, if you will. And then on the ESL side, we, host the servers. So we are parsing that data all within our license that we've, secured from our publishing partners, putting it into a database and then sort of pushing it out from there. In that regard. So it's about ensuring that it's got the highest level of accuracy, the instantaneous nature of it, and the automation behind it, I think, is super compelling. But it starts with the relationship with the developer or the publisher to make sure that we're operating within bounds, which we're always upfront about, and then also making sure that we've got the right access behind how we do that. So there's a lot that's happening on the technology front. I think that's going to unlock so much more of that gamification.
And Craig, just to point out again, that Craig just mentioned just a little snippet of all of that infrastructure that's necessary to make that happen. So you layer that on, plus all the other investment that needs to happen from a compliance perspective, because you're not just dealing with regulatory compliance from a gambling perspective, but you're also dealing with data monetization here, right? And data transfer across state lines, across borders. Trying to address a disparate nature of laws that exist in the United States and other jurisdictions, and gamers all over the world, and interest all over the world. It's daunting, and for the smaller operators, it's not necessarily going to be an easy play without significant investment. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of consolidation. You're already seeing it, with Marc. Marc's company was bought by Bally, and you see that consolidation going on in that market. And that's just on the general, just sports betting and the content plays that company's generating. And it's pretty impressive about what's going on with the big folks. What's going to happen to the smaller stakeholders, and how are they going to play in this whole regime and this market and ecosystem? I think the market has a lot of maturity to go through, in terms of getting to a point where you can say, yeah, I'm going to be betting on, this particular, Fortnite match, just like I'm betting on, the Bills versus the Jets on any particular Sunday. I don't think we're there, but I could see it happening over a period of time. I just think there's going to be a lot of change in the marketplace, depending on, who wins, who loses.
Right. And what's really interesting about esports betting, as Craig was saying, is that because certain broadcasters and certain leagues have the agreements with publishers to host things on the server side, the availability for such granular data allows really micro sort of betting to take place. You can make a wager on who's going to win this team fight, what is going to be the outcome of this push, or to more broadly, as you were sort of saying, Dan, of who's going to win this match or who's going to take this whole tournament. It can be as big or as small as the technology allows it. And so my next question is it because of all of this, the technology that's involved, that makes the interest in entering this as so attractive for investors, because there's so much that can be done, that can be someone looking to enter the market can pick a specific lane of, this is something I find really interesting in terms of investing my dollars into, or this is something I would really like to develop because in the market that I'm in right now, this is very popular, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious to hear how everyone's opinion of what makes this market so attractive to investment and growth. Let's start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's a short answer for me, just because that's where the money is, right? We're talking about $200 billion industry. Probably esports is less than a tenth of that, if not less than that at this point. But you can see that all that we've been talking about, and the different the infinite number of outcomes, the demand, just generally from an audience perspective, when you see the fandom that is created as a result of these, just taking a live sporting event, like one of the top events of League of Legends, whatever it may be, there's just a ton of eyeballs there. Advertisers are interested, multiple stakeholders are interested. So why not attack a market that's got hundreds of billions of dollars behind it, and it's growing because sports betting has just been legalized in the United States not too long ago. So I think it's become a global market, but the U.S. is where everybody wants to be. That's where the growth is. technology certainly is going to drive that. It typically does. And I think there's significant opportunity for disruptors and innovators on the tech side to enter that market and become an important piece to kind of crack that market, and crack that shell to figure out exactly what's going to resonate with new customers, because that's the key right here. It's converting, and Mark could probably attest to this the best on the betting side. When you're looking at it from an operator's perspective, I would assume you're trying to figure out how do I obtain, new and convert new customers into betting customers, and that is going to be key. And whatever company or entity can kind of figure that out, and that puzzle into determining exactly what resonates with that particular individual. And it may not be the same type of thing that resonates with a particular gamer or even an audience member that just general fan of an event or an esporting event. It may not be the same person that might bet on that event. But I do think there are some corollaries and some things that are different than from traditional sports that the esports industry can learn from, kind of try to cater to that targeted audience, people that are really that I know that Craig talks about it and others talk about in the esports industry, that esports DNA, what makes esports audience members and the ecosystem tick from a fan perspective. If they could tap into that and figure out how to market to these folks to convert them into wagering customers, that's a huge market right there. And I think it's just a dollars and cents, type of decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's driving the investment is the age and the demographic of the audience. Two-thirds of it being, at least two-thirds of it being over the legal wagering age here in the U.S. I think that's sizable. The ability to cross over within other products, and then also the generational shift, right? The average age of an esports fan is 26. Compare that with 57 for Major League Baseball. So again, this is about changing consumer habits, and I think the opportunity, saying who's a gamer today is like saying who listens to music, right? Everyone under a certain age, as Mark put it, plays games. So this is your audience. It's an acquisition tool. There's other interests. There's crossover. So from a relevancy perspective, I think audience is one. And the second is, as Dan started to talk about, is the technology. And I think what esports really encompasses and embodies is the generational shift in entertainment that's happening out there with digital, whether it's TikTok or Twitch or YouTube or anything else. It's fundamentally changing the way that this next generation is consuming content. And I think esports is an easier sandbox to experiment in a little bit there from an innovation perspective around how you build off this, future of fan engagement. And that fan engagement, in my opinion, is all based on interactivity. That's the basis of video games. So again, being able to participate in contests and things like that are going on makes it a more inclusive experience that this generation is used to. So I think those are trends that you're going to see other sports lean into over time. But in many cases, they've got, let's say, more entrenched business relationships that I think in many cases might make them slower to adopt some of the new technology that esports can be on the cutting edge on, along with, again, the digital nature that we've spoken to. So I really think those are some of the two big reasons that you're seeing more accelerated investment into this.
Yeah, and I'll build on that as well. So I think Dan and Craig, built a perfect business case for why esports isn't going anywhere. Okay. Certainly from a, gambling perspective, we all know that this is the largest addressable market that we're going to see in the next 2 decades. Okay. It's a numbers game. There are so many gamers out there compared to so many people who are interested in, the NFL, the NBA, and even soccer, that the numbers are just daunting. Okay. And what is a little different with esports versus, your traditional, big five, if you want to call them, the big five, is that gaming is only going to get more and more distribution, more and more games, and that is where all the investment is going in, into a content development scheme over the next, few decades from all of these digital companies. But no one's creating another, NFL. They tried to a couple of times, but it just hasn't worked. Okay. So, but, there is going to be another, Fortnite. There is going to be another Call of Duty. ESL is only going to get bigger as they do more and more events. And as these things become more mainstream, and I use that term, purposefully, because esports is mainstream. Okay. But the reality is that it's very low tier mainstream right now. Okay. And that niche audience really isn't a niche audience. It's a massive audience. It's a massive audience that currently is underserved by our industry. Okay. And our industry is slow to adopt because, let's be honest, everything in the United States as it relates to gambling has been, taboo, since the, 1918 Black Sox scandal. Okay. And we're now talking about an event that happened over 100 years ago. However, it still, permeates every discussion that we have as it relates to integrity. And I think that as the mainstream kind of starts to flow a little faster around esports, and you start getting more of the bigger advertisers saying, you know what, that's where we're going to start placing our bets now. That's when you'll see, I think, the pivot. Because listen, Craig will tell you right now, okay, if you want to watch esports, there's plenty of shows, that you can go watch esports on. Okay. But I think what esports is missing right now is, the mainstream popularity that other sports like UFC, and I think UFC is kind of the best example of a new sport in the last 20 years that's come on and really, exploded onto every different platform, whether it's Twitch, whether it's YouTube, whether it's, pay-per-view, things of that nature. But I think that is really kind of a microcosm of the trajectory that esports is on. And once we start having those icons, and again, this is really going to, date me, but like, I know who Ninja is, I know, FaZe Clan, I know a couple of, I know Evil Geniuses. Okay. And I work with a couple of them. But my point is that, that's the extent of a guy that's about 50, in my knowledge of it. Okay. But I can tell you that my son and all, his friends, their college dormitories and, their social interactions, each day revolve around what's happening in the esports community. And when they become, of legal betting age, they're going to be a lot more interested in betting on FaZe Clan than they are about betting on, the New England Patriots. And I think that is what's so exciting about the future of esports, and what's so exciting about, the investment kind of recognizing that, hey, this is a massive addressable audience. This is something that, that, to be very fair, hasn't been figured out yet by either the media companies or the gambling companies. And once that, convergence happens, I think you're going to see, it'll probably look something like if you open up the Bally Bet app, or your favorite, sports betting app, it'll probably be something like, NFL, NBA, esports, where like right now it's NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, in that order. But I think tennis. Yeah. But I think esports, is not that far off from just exploding up that ladder.
Yeah. So based on what you were just saying, Mark, with your son, and also sort of the difference between the average age of the traditional sports betting being, upwards in the 50s, and then for esports, it's in their 20s. Do you think it's going to take meeting in the middle of that average age, getting closer for esports, getting closer, either the industry itself growing older a bit, so that this demographic also grows with the industry, to get it to the level of synonymous, the synonymous nature of sports and betting. Sports and betting are hand in glove, has been for a while, but esports betting is still, as you said, I mean, tied with the US being a bit taboo. So does it take getting the traditional sports audience more interested in esports betting, or the esports betting audience growing a bit older generally and adapting new, for lack of a better term, sort of an older audience to bring esports betting popularity closer to that as the traditional sports betting?
I'm going to give a very brief answer on this one because I really want to hear what Craig has to think about this. Okay. But, the way I feel about it personally is this. I was involved in the poker boom, roughly 15 years or so ago. Okay. And we took, 6 guys sitting around a table and put them on TV and created massive amounts of content I was the producer of Poker After Dark. I worked on High Stakes Poker. I worked for the WPT at a certain point. So my point is that there was a lot of content that created this poker boom. And, people went online to play poker, and, online poker became a staple of online gaming. Right now, I don't think it's a question of, are we waiting for the older guys that haven't really kind of experienced gaming to kind of start plucking their money down on League of Legends games or Dota games? I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see the people that are already interested in esports just being more addressable in terms of the esports betting products that they have access to provided to them, and creating the awareness around those betting products and that engagement to kind of create that connective tissue between whatever game they love and the players they or the teams that they want to bet on. And that all comes from the content creation, the education, and the stuff that Craig does. And I think, by asking Craig, hey, who are showing up, what's the demographic that's showing up to your events? What are they telling you? I think Craig probably has, the best pulse on, where things are today and what those people are looking for.
I mean, a lot of it I think has to do with the changing regulatory landscape. So even sports betting is just now increasingly here in the U.S. becoming more accessible. So I think that's, again, one, is more states, sort of move to this. And as Dan said, right, hopefully there starts to become also some consistent framework to make it easier or less painful a little bit to navigate through. I think those things are going to help. And then as Marc was describing, right, sports are about heroes and villains and storylines. The UFC is the perfect example where you look at this, 40 years ago where the sport was kind of just growing into now where it is. And even 15 years ago, no one would have predicted that they would have done the massive deal that they did with ESPN, right? A Disney company for what had been called this barbaric sport. And here it is, with coverage and part of their plus sort of offering. So things change. And ultimately, it's all about, right, you look back at the history of the UFC and, the Ultimate Fighter, the Spike show that it was, that sort of to humanize, right, the competition of it, and then breakthrough stars like McGregor and Ronda Rousey. And that's ultimately, I think, what became that hook that sort of really catapulted things through. And going back to, right, the story of esports, every game is not an esport. And what's unique about it, I think that's right, this misunderstood element of it. Counter-Strike's 22 years old. What does that mean? Is that not just kids in dorm rooms are playing it today, but, oh, by the way, people who might not be playing it or might be going to Vegas for an NCAA Final Four are now seeing this game that they grew up with, that they understand. And now as you create those heroes around it, it becomes that much more of an attach point to get involved with. And to Marc's point, I think if you don't know what Counter-Strike or Dota or League of Legends is, you're probably not the target audience. The good news is that the generation that knows what it is a lot bigger and a lot more influential, I think, than everyone kind of understands. So these aren't just new games that kids are playing, but again, titles that generations have grown up with. And it's just a matter of doing the right storytelling around it and time to incubate that fandom at the level that we're so used to seeing with the NFL and the NBA and the Big Five, as Marc put it.
Yeah, I just to add on that, I think Craig hit the nail on the head. Unlocking the value is the key to this market, right? And part of that, one of the key aspects of it is media rights. It just does not have the cachet or the deal volume that you would see in a traditional sport that has that audience, that vast audience that it has, and that key demographic. I mean, I cannot tell you how many non-endemic advertising type clients, major Fortune 500 companies, are super interested in this space and invest quite a few advertising dollars out of their budget, out of their annual budget, to spend on reaching this demo. The key to the gambling aspect, I really think, is generating that interest from that side content. The production value is key. It's much different production, as Craig can attest. It's a much different production than an NFL game or a tennis match. There's certain angles and certain things that need to be focused on, and side stories, and creating those heroes and villains that it just doesn't really have yet. And that's what really makes, the UFC, the WWE, even go to WWE, they've done it for years, with just incredible storylines, and they hook kids in at a young age, and they're, fans for life. I think that's what, and they're not starting from scratch, right? Because the majority of us have played video games, where I'm dating myself. I started back with Pong, and I had that in my house. I mean, and went through every console known to man. And now I can't even get on a PS5 with my son because he kills me. I can't play Madden with anybody, although I'd love to. But the ultimately everybody's a gamer. At least the main demographic, everybody's a gamer, understands the gaming kind of technology, as well as the value of the entertainment. It's unlocking that value with that side content and those stories, and the production around it, that will drive interest in not only watching the sport, but actually getting together and gambling on it and betting on it. Because you think about the sports that folks bet on now, and how big fantasy sports is. I think it's a great way to look at it. Everybody's into fantasy sports. Anybody that likes football and plays fantasy football does it not necessarily for the money. It's really for the pride and just the activity every Thursday through Monday. There's something to bet on, and there's something to watch, and there's interest in any game, just even if you're not interested in that team and you're not a fan of the team. I think there's a market there for esports once it becomes, more mainstream than it is. Like Marc said, not that it's not mainstream because it's got that audience. It's just, how do you unlock the value of that audience? And I think content is the key to that.
Yeah, and I'm going to add one thing, that we did a poor job of it today, and shame on me because it's such a big part of our company's initiative. But we're fully behind the women's sports movement, and we just signed a landmark deal with the Phoenix Mercury and the WNBA, and esports is another one of these categories where the girls are just as important as the guys, and from an addressable market standpoint, we look at the UFC, and I was talking to Dan yesterday, and I said there's going to be that Ronda Rousey moment where there's an iconic woman and there may already and to my naivete, I'm sure Craig can say, hey, there's 20 of them already.
There are teams for sure.
but my point is that we haven't reached that mainstream iconic athlete level in esports really outside of Ninja as far as I'm aware. Okay, but I think that as the industry itself starts to promote women in esports, women teams in esports, and again we look at the total addressable market here. It just has all the hallmarks of where you want to go with a industry that is going to be investing, tens of millions of dollars, not only in advertising, but in the technology to deliver these services to what, I think we all agree is an underserved market today. But again, it won't remain that way. The money is just too big and the numbers are just too in favor of esports growing, exponentially, after it rounds some corner that I'm not aware of yet, but that I think we're all trying to crack.
I think Dan and Mark touched on an important piece too, right? It's also how is legal gambling also help propel esports, right? That when you look at fantasy and daily fantasy, what that's done to create superstars out of maybe lesser known positional players in the NFL. I think that's part of the opportunity that new generation, let's say, of storytelling that Dan was alluding to. It's not just how do you as esports tell the stories through the way that traditional sports have, but how do we lean into this new technology as an opportunity to create more fans, to create more engagement that just grows every aspect of it. So I do believe that they can be complementary as well to getting towards that mission.
Yeah. Okay. One last quick question before we have to go, gentlemen. And you sort of just touched on it, Craig, of what are potentially a simple way that legal sports betting can help with esports monetization in the near future. How can esports betting help bring esports more profits?
Yeah, I think it's a new revenue stream that could be unlocked, and traditional sports leagues are now just recognizing this for the first time, right, themselves, especially on the team side and the club side. So it's a new revenue channel. But I think ultimately for esports, what it will be is the basis for more direct-to-consumer, direct-to-fan monetization. I think that's an aspect of the industry that is not represented in the $1 billion, $1.5 billion kind of numbers. And when we're able to do that, not if, there's proven demand from this audience with a $143 billion video game industry that they're willing to transact around what they like. So it's a matter of finding that value. And I think that, gambling can be an aspect or a lever rather to driving that as a new revenue channel.
I concur with that, Kerry. I would say fan engagement is the key, right? It's this market, this target demo is very sticky and picky, right? Sticky and picky. They know when they're being lied to, per se. They know what's real and what's not. And they are very loyal to particular brands. To get people involved through the gambling aspect and tie them in as a hook with those direct-to-consumer offerings that Craig alluded to that are underserved in this market, I think there's significant value there. And it all comes in, from a variety of angles. And I think media rights is key to unlocking that as well, because the more mainstream media that plays into this, the better off they're going to be. You look at, like we talked about UFC and what Disney Plus did for UFC and Spike and initially, major networks I know have, put their toes in the water, but I don't think they've really figured it out yet. There really hasn't been a specific, major network that has had the type of programming and storytelling that Craig described that really engages those fans, those casual fans, to kind of say, you know what, this is something I'm interested in. But I think gambling can get them there. You got the casual gamblers that are betting on sports. If they understand what they're betting on, then they're going to bet on them. And I'm going to turn that over to Mark because he knows the gambler, consumer behavior more than anybody on this call. But I do believe that could be an impetus to engage a fan to become a consumer of esports, not just from a gambling perspective, but take advantage of all the ecosystem has to offer, whether it goes, it's attending events or it's playing the games on an amateur level, or what have you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'll button it up this way. I think where that, and what we're talking about here is cross-selling. Okay. So we're talking about cross-selling, football bettors or baseball bettors, and their relationships, which I'm going to get to, into esports. Okay. And how do you make that happen? Okay. Well, I mean, and this is just kind of riffing on a marketing, ploy, but, the NBA has NBA 2K, NFL has Madden. Okay. If you start seeing, features, at halftime during the NFL games or during the NBA games of, the players, playing in these, celebrity type tournaments, on the esports side of the equation. And you have myself sitting with my son and we're watching an NFL game and he finds, the virtual Madden game, a lot more interesting because, maybe, Tua Tagovailoa is, playing for the Dolphins, with their little team, during halftime of the game, and it's just a roll-in. I think that's where you're going to see, a little transfer of that cross-selling between generations, where, my son says to me, hey, you know what? You'll find this just as exciting as I do once you get to know that, this team is the best and so on and so forth, because you understand, Madden and you understand NBA 2K. Now, you don't understand, League of Legends, so stay out of that thing. But, you might, but maybe next weekend, we'll throw $10 on, the Miami Dolphins, Madden team. And I think that's something that is definitely, being talked about amongst broadcasters. And I think we saw a little bit of it in the NBA bubble. And I think that might be, the first movement, if you will, of dragging, a newer audience to a newer vertical in gaming.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up this episode of ESI Focus. I'd like to thank our guests again, Craig, Mark, Daniel. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. Where can our listeners find you online?
Well, yeah, for me, you can just go to ballys.com. I encourage everyone to download the Bally Bet app in the jurisdictions where it's legal, and get all your sports information from Bally Sports Network. Yeah, we're all you have to do is type in Bally Sports, ballys.com, and you'll find us in every corner of the digital space. I guess I should also mention Stadium Network, our digital sports app. So yeah, we've got the sports landscape pretty well covered, and yeah, we're excited for esports to come along.
ESLgaming.com. Go sign up for a competition and join us at DreamHack Beyond later this month, our first digital festival. So plenty of ways to get involved.
Yeah, and I'm at sheppardmullin.com. That's SheppardMullin. You could look me up or any of our practices there and our expertise. We're a full service law firm, international, and happy to help.
Thanks again, Sheppard Mullin, our partner for this mini-series as well. And we'll have one more episode coming up, focusing on law and esports. So be sure to tune into that one. And until then, I'm Kerry Wananen, signing off.